In this video, we're going to look at working with text files. Now, during the past several modules, we have been working with text files, which is ahead of the time that it's introduced in your textbook. The idea is that I wanted you to be able to make a real Python application, one that could be used in a practical application at your home or maybe at your work. So I introduced it at that point in time, but your author doesn't introduce working with text files until Module 7, and then you'll find he goes into detail about how it's done. So let's look at some of the items that are mentioned in Module 7. I'm going to take this code here. This is the first example. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. And you can see that it's opening up a file under the Python class folder. The file is called test.txt, and it is in write mode. So the three basic modes are write, read, and append. Write just overrides the existing file. Append adds to the file, and a read, of course, reads the file. So let's say I want to work with this Module 7. Now, Module 7 is a project and folder I have made to work with. If you've made it this far, you've been seeing me do something like that. It's under the path of Python class, which is fine to some degree, but under the folder Python class, but it's under Module 7. So I would need to change this to be able to access this file. And I'll escape the slash. Of course, if you're on a Mac, this isn't a problem. You just go forward, etc. Another thing you can do is you can actually just put in the name of the file. And if you do that, it will assume that the file you're trying to write to is in the same folder as the Python file you're trying to run. And so the file should show up with the word test inside, and it does. Of course, each time I run the code, it overrides the existing file and I get a new content. And sometimes that's appropriate. For example, if you read the content of the file when the application opens into memory, and then you make changes, and then you save it back again to the same file, you wouldn't want to append it. You'd want to flush everything that you had previously, plus the added stuff, into a new version of the file. And you would use write instead of append. So there are certainly times where that would be appropriate. Of course, one other thing I want to mention, append mode obviously allows you to add more content. And one thing that is pretty common in the industry is that write mode will often not create a new file for you, or append mode may not create a new file for you. It may have to exist already before you can either append it or write to it. In Python, if the file doesn't exist in write mode or append mode, it will just create it for you. It's just one of Python's friendly features. Now, of course, you can read data from a file also. Just change it over to read format. There is a read method. What happens is that when you call the function open, it will create a new object in memory. This new object is a file handler. Basically, there is a class for handling files, and in there are several different methods, like the read method. If a method is a static method in a class, like the ones that you made in the last module, you do not have to make an object first to use it. You just put the name of the class dot the name of the method. But if it's what they refer to as an instance method, or a class method sometimes, you have to make an object first and then use it from the object. And I showed you last module, there was I showed you that you can think of an object being made, and it would have its, well, this is a very bad drawing. It would have, its functions inside of it. Yes, that is a very bad drawing. What happens is that when you call the open method, it automatically creates a object for you, and then the variable obj file points to that address. Let's say the address is, I don't know, 22. I should start using address 111 or something like that, so it's easier to draw. But anyway, so now there would be functions inside of this object at address 22 that I could use. Read is one of them. I just call that function, if it's inside of functions inside the class, they call it a method. I call it a function, I call it a method. I don't really care, to tell you the truth. So we call that function or method, and that function returns a string of data. And what it does is it reads all of the data at once. Let's give it a shot. It's just going to print out the data and close the file. Now, if there was more data, it's going to read that too. Including those carriage returns that I put in there. So that's a handy command. Pretty easy to use. There are times where you want all the data read at once, especially if the data is in something like a XML format. So if I had an XML format like this, come on. Okay, that's an XML document. Oh, I should indent this too, I guess. I'll use a single indent because I'm being lazy. Okay, that's an XML document. It's just a fancy version of a comma-separated value file that we've been using. XML is often equated with web technology, but it's not really about the web. It's really just an upgraded, fancy comma-separated value file on steroids. Just another way of storing data. It's kind of like a dictionary in some ways, because it's got a name and a value combination. Name and value. But you can also make multi-dimensional collections. Like this would be a customer element, and then these two are elements inside of that customer element. And of course, you could have, hey, get down there, 2 or 3 or 500. It's just another way of storing data. Comma separate value files don't have a way of indicating the name as well as the value, not easily. You just get the value. That'd be like a list. An XML file allows you to have a key and value pair. It's more like a dictionary. 2 different ways of storing data. And XML, of course, is stored as an XML file, but it's really just a text file. So don't let it fool you just having a fancy extension. Okay, so now I'll just go ahead and read that data. And often when I'm working with XML, I want to pull in all the data because there are modules in Python and most other languages too that allow me to navigate down to a particular element in the XML document. Let's say that I want to find the first name in the XML document. It would take me to this first element of name. And there's ways of going through and looping through an XML document, converting XML document from one value to another. There's all kinds of technology revolving around XML. But the point is that you won't be able to do that unless you load up the entire XML document and start to work with it. Or at least most of the time that would be the case. So there are times where you want to read the entire document into memory, but more often you may actually just want to go through and read a single line at a time and then do some kind of processing. So ReadLine is a popular choice for that. And you can see that it just gets one line of data. And one thing to note is that every time you call ReadLine, it advances what they refer to as the cursor. So it reads that first line, and then you can see the cursor flashing, and that's kind of what they're talking about, except of course it's not a visual cursor, it's a in-memory cursor. The cursor advances to the next row of data. Call the ReadLine again, it advances the cursor. Again, advances the cursor, advances the cursor until you're all done. And of course, this means that you can set up a loop to do something like that as well. So I have noted here that ReadLine acts like a cursor. Cursor is a common technology for walking through lines of data, or rows of data. Very common in the industry. So, append mode, in this example, I'm going through and opening the file, asking the user to enter in a ID and name and save it to the file. And if they type in exit, I quit. So while it's true, and it will continue to be true until somebody types in exit and I break out, ask for the ID and name, and then I write to the file. So let's see what that would look like. You've done something like this, no doubt. Now, if I went to do it in XML mode, certainly I could handle that. It would just be a matter of going through and and formatting it, finding where the entries need to go. In other words, finding the last customer element and sliding it into there. There are certainly ways of doing that, but let's move away from our XML example and just work with something simple. So I'm going to go back to the comma separated value file. I'm going to ask my users to enter in just one row of data all at a time. So when this runs, I'm expecting them to type in like ID 1, comma, Bob Smith. And 2, comma, Sue Jones. Now I probably should go through here and check to make sure that the user is not putting in extra spaces either at the end or in front, but I'm not doing any of that. So, and then exit. And if we look at the customer's text file that was made, we can see that we've captured our data. Very simple code. It is now anyway, since you've been working with this for a couple weeks now. And I think you'll agree that this code is not that scary anymore, although I think you'll also agree that for many of you, the first day, if you would have opened this file, it would have been pretty weird. So you guys have been making good improvements. Now, I can combine reading and writing to give myself an application, and that's kind of what we've been doing. One way that you can do this is use the plus mode. Page 193 of your book has a little chart that talks about the open command, and write plus allows you to read plus, excuse me, allows you to both read and write to a file by just opening it once. So I'm going to go ahead and open it, print out the current data all at one shot, and then I'm going to go through and let them append by using that same code we just saw, and then tell them that the data is going to be saved when they exit, show them what has been saved, and then close the connection. Let's see how it works. Now, I have my customer's file. I'll go ahead and run it. And you can see I've got those two entries already. So now I'm going to add a third entry. And let's see if it actually saved it. Now, I'm surprised it actually didn't show me the data, but that means that the data it was reading out of the file just didn't show up. It didn't actually read, and that's because the cursor was at the bottom when it tried to read it. It was right there. So if the cursor has advanced to the bottom and you ask it to read, it will read what's left. There is nothing left, and so we end up with a blank. So, in order to restart at the beginning of the file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add in a new command called seek. Oops, not seek. And I can tell it to go to a specific part of the file, if I can type it out, that is. Specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tell it to start off at the very beginning at 0. And we'll try this again. And this time you can see that because we had moved the cursor to the top, when it goes through and calls read again, the cursor starts at the top and is able to go through and read everything out of the file. So that's some ways of working with files. There is more in the book, there's more on the internet, but that will give you a pretty good start, and as you've seen, you're able to do quite a bit of practical work with just storing data in a text file. Python's really easy to work with files in that way, and it's it's definitely one of its main strong points. Okay, we're going to do a lab. We're going to do a lab here in just a second, so I will see you in that video.